Hello, everybody, and you are very welcome to Successful Perspectives. Successful Perspectives, of course, is when we deep dive into the topic of leadership and generally just have a great conversation with one of our members from our very selective and very influential network, Boardroom by EMIR. For this chat, I am delighted, and I mean genuinely delighted, to be joined by Shant Oknayan, who basically runs Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa for TikTok. Shant, it is wonderful to have you on Successful Perspectives, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Trevor.
Shant, I have had the pleasure of getting to know you a little bit over the last few years, and I think I remember the first time I met you was you were at Meta, then Facebook. And you've had senior positions across lots of these big, huge organizations. And I remember being genuine. This will be a little bit vomit inducing, but I remember thinking, who is this smart guy? That was my impression of you. And you've proven that to be true the more I've got to know you. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation because you're a member of our network quite a while, but I've also noticed that you're progressing in every organization you go in, you're jumping up to more and more senior positions. So I've been looking forward to kind of picking your brains on leadership. Let's start by doing that and going back in time a little bit, okay? Not too long ago, because you're still a young guy, but thinking about leadership when you were younger, maybe in school or starting out on your career. Was there someone, a leader that you looked up to that kind of represented or had characteristics that you thought were important in being a leader?
I've identified that person now. I don't know that held true back in the day. And that would be my father. So a little bit about him. He was born in Egypt, moved to Lebanon, worked there, and then when the Civil War started, moved to Italy, almost as a refugee, right? And this is a man who used to fly airplanes. That's what he used to do. He was a flight engineer. And when he moved to Italy, he moved into the business world, into the fashion and furniture world. So a very different industry to what his experience and expertise was in. But he never gave up. And so if I think about some of the traits he's exhibited that I've learned implicitly, and I think and I hope I epitomize as well these days, he showed optimism, right?
Yeah.
He showed resilience.
He showed adaptability.
Absolutely.
Do you score high on adaptability on these personality assessments?
I do because I fundamentally believe that change is the only constant. So you need to, and you'll hear it from my organization as well. I'll sometimes institute change in the organization because I actually think it's going to create uncomfortable excitement, right? So that adaptability, that resilience, that optimism, that protagonist mindset are traits that I've learned from my father.
Tell me more about this uncomfortable excitement. What does that mean to you?
So especially with newer generations, and we spoke about this a while back when we did a session around Gen Zs, Trevor, at EMIR, you may remember.
Yeah.
One of the aha moments I've had working for what could be considered a Gen Z company is that while historically people would have one 20-year career, today people want to have 20 one-year careers. And therefore, change is the only constant. Within a year, they're like, I'm comfortable, I know what I'm doing. How are you going to keep me excited? And growth mindset comes from when you are uncomfortably excited, when you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have the answers, but I'm going to have to figure this out, right? You can be scared by change, or you can say, to heck with it. I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to put on my protagonist mindset, and I'm going to be uncomfortably excited by this. And I'd like to believe that that's what I've experienced throughout my journey as well, right? I've always kind of said, I'm ready to take on more and proven that I can be successful by exhibiting that protagonist mindset.
I love it. And when you think about it, I don't know where I read this, but the sensations, even the physical sensations in the body of when you're scared, your heart beats faster, your hands get sweaty. They're the same things that when you're actually excited. If you're on a roller coaster, if you're about to give a talk, and it's really just how you decide to view it. And that's what, when I started doing a lot of public speaking, many years ago, a lot of people think that you're born a good public speaker. You're not. I was terrible, like absolutely terrible. Like you couldn't imagine anyone being so bad at public speaking. And now this is a big part of what I do. And it's the same sensations. You stand up, you feel a little bit, I feel a little bit nervous. I have butterflies. It's the same thing when you're about to go and do something exciting. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that in terms of some of the ideas that you have about leadership. So again, kind of going back in time, starting out in your career, what were some of the beliefs that maybe you had about being a leader that now you realize you sit over a large organization, over a huge region, and that you realize that was actually nonsense?
So, my younger self would have thought that leaders have all the answers. They don't.
Yeah.
What great leaders I find do really well is that they surround themselves with great people. They listen to them. And then it's their job to sense check and distill the best solutions, best answers. So they're actually almost acting like a filter by taking input from the phenomenal people that they've surrounded themselves by. That's what a leader does, in my view. They distill fact from fiction. They remove the noise element, and they help the organization see the forest from the trees, right? Tactics, initiatives versus what's the overall vision? What's the strategy that all of these tactics initiatives are working towards? So single trees into a forest. So to me, the absolute nonsense was that leaders have all the answers from the get-go. No, leaders are just phenomenal at finding those answers from the great people that they surround themselves with.
Yeah, and this is something Ray Dalio talks a lot about in his principles, right? Looking at your organization like a machine or like an engine, and you're not going to have all the best, you're not going to have the answers, and you're just continually trying to calibrate the machine and take in input from everybody and feed that back into the machine, which I think is quite interesting. So I guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm viewing this, I see we've hundreds of members, and I see what they're up to on obviously when they come to our sessions and when I connect with them and maybe we have a coffee, but also just they're social, and I see people moving around, and I think it seems, at least from my perspective, that you've progressed quite a lot throughout your career in pretty kind of, I wouldn't, relatively short periods of time. You've continued to progress up the ladder, and now obviously you're over a very large region for a huge, exciting company. This idea, and maybe this is something that ties into the last question about, or maybe not, about this idea of popular beliefs. One popular belief is the further you get up in an organization, obviously you're working with and overseeing more people, or you're responsible for more people, responsible for their success, I would say. And you hear a lot that it's, it can be lonely at the top. The further you get to the top, it gets more lonely. What's your take on that?
That it can get lonely at the top, but it's a choice whether you want to be lonely or not, right?
So how do you make that choice, and then how do you work through that to make sure it's not a kind of a lonely cell up there?
So what I mean is you make the choice to be lonely, right? Because of the popular misconception that a leader needs to have all the answers and therefore you can't show the vulnerable self. All of a sudden you start marginalizing yourself and become lonely. I actually like being very open about what I know and what I don't know. I usually have different councils that I interact with to spar ideas with, to share those challenges, those opportunities, and listen to their advice and shared experiences, whether it's my peers in other regions, right? The leader in North America or LATAM or Europe, whether it's mentors from previous lives. I chat with my dad a lot, as we discussed earlier, and anyone else who's helped me shape my career. Sometimes it's someone who's in my team in a different company whose opinion I really value. So they're not more senior, they're not more experienced than I may be, but they might bring a more valuable perspective in terms of almost reverse mentoring. So I have these, what I call different forums of personal advisors that I meet regularly with to discuss anything from successes to challenges with full vulnerability. I believe that's the best way to not feel isolated and to keep bettering yourself.
And what's if you don't mind, what's your dad's take on your career? Because it sounds like he's a very driven guy, and we all start life. We're all running a race, and we start at different points, right? And we determine somebody's success on this arbitrary line where we don't realize somebody else. Like when you describe what your father has done, he's immensely successful guy because of what he's been able to achieve in the face of such adversity, right? And then in one generation, his son, I'm sure he's very proud of you because genuinely you're very bright, very energetic, very optimistic. You have a good energy to be around. I'm sure he's very proud of you. What's his take on your career? Because in one jump of a generation, it's quite a shift.
Look, the more recent reminders from my father are more on the personal side than the professional side. He's like, if you want to be the best version of yourself, that needs to be viewed in a holistic manner. You can't just be successful professionally. You also need to ensure that your personal side, your own well-being is also reaching new heights. So how do you manage for family time? How do you manage for your own health, for your own mental sanity as well, of not being constantly on and hence maybe burn out? So these are some of the more recent reminders from my father to say adaptability needs to also come in the form of how are you taking care of yourself and your loved ones?
Yeah, and it's wise, because if you don't take care of yourself first, it'll be very difficult to take care of everyone else. One of our friends of the network, Peter Stringer, who's an international rugby player, played the highest levels, and that's what he gets up at 5 a.m. and hits the gym. And what he says to me is that in order for him, that's his time that he has to create for himself, in order to be able to then support his wife and lovely kids, and that it's making that time for yourself in order to be able to do the good stuff for the other important people in your life. Speaking of important people, what about within the organization, right? We've spoken a lot about leadership, but when you go and interact with other colleagues, how do you go about identifying potential leaders or future leaders in the organization, and what kind of behaviors do you look for?
So I'm a man of science, so I like kind of mathematical kind of approaches to this, and I have a framework with three axes. One of them is IQ, the second is EQ, emotional quotient, and there's a third one that I've added recently, given my more global role, which is CQ, cultural quotient, right? IQ, everyone's familiar with. What are your general cognitive abilities? What are your skill sets, right? EQ, I think most people are aware of as well. What kind of mindset? How do you interact with people? The more qualitative side of how you think. And then the third is this cultural quotient of how do you operate in a global environment? How do you navigate different cultures, different approaches to business, different reactions, right? Because you may be geared in one way and you might come across very differently to what you assumed you would to someone in a different part of the world. So how do EQ to me is around a one-to-one relationship, being able to read one another. CQ is when you extrapolate that to also say, how do you operate in another market, How do you think when you're working with other cultures? So when I'm looking at potential leaders in an organization, I'm looking for people who score high on IQ, EQ, and CQ.
I love it. I love it. It's absolutely fascinating. And do you weight them in any particular? Is it an equal weighting, or how do you look at it?
It depends on kind of what role and responsibility I'm looking for, right? Maybe on something a little bit more technical, the IQ component plays a bigger role. In something more business related, there needs to be a balance between that IQ and EQ. And if it's a global role, then maybe it's a third across IQ, EQ, and CQ.
Love it. Okay, one last question, Shant, before we go on and have a little bit of fun with our rapid fire round. And that is, and maybe this is a question that you discuss with your father because he sounds like quite a wise guy. How do you find your purpose nowadays? Because this is something that, is a common conversation for leaders. And I think the goalposts are moving for all of our lives continually and what we prioritize. So how do you go about thinking about that?
I think the best piece of advice is I've been given, and many probably have been given the same, is what is my tombstone going to say one day? It's not going to say, look how much revenue he drove, or look how many businesses he managed, but it's going to describe the type of person that you are, right? A great father, a life partner. Ultimately, it's about how you've had an impact on those around you and how you help them become a better version of themselves as a result of your interaction with them. Now, I genuinely am excited and energized when I see someone doing better as a result of a conversation and interaction that we've had, right? And I was once told that one needs to move from success to significance. That's kind of the ultimate pursuit of a leader. You can be successful, but are you actually being significant? And significance is about being remembered for the type of person you are and the type of impact you had on the individuals you interacted with, not on how was Q3 revenue in 2022.
Shant, I love that because the reason why I start doing these chats, right? One, I'm in a very fortunate position with this big network, and I thought it'd be an interesting way just to engage with our members. But genuinely, the initial reason was because as our business grew, I didn't see myself as a kind of natural leader, or I was the person that started the business, and then we started to hire more people, and I made a mess of it for quite a while. And I realized this is something I am going to have to figure out. And then I thought, I have literally hundreds of these very accomplished men and women that are doing this. And I get to sit with them for 20 minutes and pick their brains. And that every once in a while, I hear a little kind of golden nugget that really makes me think. And there's been a few of them now that I've very much actioned and brought into the business. And that's one of them that I hadn't thought of. One thing about being successful, but moving from success to significance. And it's just a little shift, but it changes the perspective on everything, which is nice because these chats are called successful perspectives. So I think you're very much living up to the title of the conversation. Shant, thank you so much for your time. It was genuinely a pleasure having this chat with you, and thanks for being on Successful Perspectives.
Thank you, Trevor. Really enjoyed this. Thanks for everything that you do with EMIR. Big fan. See you very soon.
Thank you. Take care.